And then this is a traditional format for two chairs, we often call it a tete-a-tete arrangement, where the two people face each other. And in many ways, it's the most intimate of the paired rockers that I did. And then the last one has the rockers facing away from each other. This is a project that was done in Darmstadt, Germany. If you were in the first semester, I'm guessing you saw other work from this project, which happens every 2 years in the public forest in Darmstadt, Germany. It's a walking path through the forest, and different artworks are installed as you walk along. And I installed 3 different seating events in the forest. And one of the things about the German forestry is it's extremely tightly managed, and so I had to drill holes in the trees to mount my chairs on the trees, and I was not allowed to drill holes in any tree that was still like a normal living tree. So I got all the sort of, this was a tree that had been hit by lightning, so you can see the whole top is exploded, and it was approved for my project. And so what these were is, they were chairs that I built on site using rustic building techniques that were not complete chairs. They required the tree to provide the final structural elements. So they were sort of grafted onto trees in different sorts of ways. So the wood came from nearby, the wood was gathered, and they were really constructed on site. So here's another one, and you can see this tree is pretty much dead. It's got those weird things growing on it. And then the final one was attached to a really incredibly beautiful large stump that was on the ground. And in this case, I just built and installed the seats, and the stump itself becomes the backrest. And then this whole project, the curator that did the project in Germany, she came over to Wisconsin, and this was done in the national forest in northern Wisconsin, again along a walking path. And I collaborated with my wife, Bert Ross, and we again did 3 seating events. This time we worked with, we sourced all our materials from Swap, which used to be right in our neighborhood, and we used to go over all the time. Now it's out in Paola, but it's still worth the trip out there, the university surplus shop. And we did different configurations of chairs in the forest, just as sort of seating events, places that you could sit. And they were generally set into the ground, partially buried in the ground, and then held in place really just with heavy-duty industrial zip ties. This was a line of wooden school chairs. And then the final one were these paired sort of conversation situations where we zip tied together 2 of these aluminum and green vinyl chairs facing each other. And the guy in the red sweatshirt is actually the forester who oversaw the whole project. So these were spread out in the forest in amongst the ticks. There you can, a little bit hard to see, but they're spread around in there. So continuing, I've actually done public seating 3 different times for the Madison Museum of Contemporary Art. This was the first time, quite a long time ago. These are benches that were inspired by the seating that you would encounter in a museum, where you sit down, and that sort of very nice feeling of relaxation when your legs are tired and you just want to sit down and take a rest. But the thing that's going on here is that this is a little bit based on that Adirondack aesthetic, where you have that backrest you can settle into. And in this case, there's 3 different zones, so 3 different people can sit facing 3 different ways. But that backrest spins. It's on a ball bearing system, a shaft and a ball bearing system. So there's this kind of thing where you could sit down, another person could sit down, and then if you wanted to move, you can slide on that pretty shiny seat. Then there's a social negotiation that takes place, because you're not just moving yourself, you're moving the other person. This one happens in reverse. In this case, the backrest stays in place, but the seat itself is a giant lazy Susan, so that's on ball bearings, and that moves around. And once again, it's that aspect of forced interaction. So here's a couple of students sitting on the two different ones and demonstrating what happens when they move. Then the next iteration of the seating was after they had the new building. So this is in that crowd that you all know from State Street. It's right in that tip there. These are industrial felt, recycled industrial felt, and just in this case, 2 of the seating situations are wrapped around the structural columns of the building, and then the one out there that's freestanding is just wrapped around a concrete casting tube. And I'll show you a little bit of construction sequence here. So here's the one that's freestanding, and then that image on the right is looking down from the top of the staircase, looking down on the top. So here's in my workshop, which normally looks like a wood shop. In this case, we've shifted it over to be able to work with the industrial felt. My helper, Jeremy Cox, not keeping his eyes where he should on his fingers there by that incredibly dangerous thing that is an incredible felt slicing tool, but it's sort of like a handheld meat cutter. With I don't think OSHA ever found out about these things. But we cut miles and miles of these felt strips with the tool, and it's really wonderful. So we prepared all these strips. We built the pieces completely in my shop. You can see in the lower right, you can see a little bit of the structure that we built them around. And then we haul all our parts to the lobby there. That probably looks a little bit familiar to you. And then there we are working, sort of wrapping it around the posts. And spending a lot of time sort of playing with the patterning and the color. And each one is a loop that then ends up with these different sort of gaps, which I ended up really liking as the loop ends. And then in the end, everything is cinched with industrial strapping from the shipping industry, where it's that steel strapping where with the specific tool you can really use a ratchet to apply a lot of compression. And you can, this is hard industrial felt. You can see that there's a lot of tension under those steel straps. And so these are, pretty sure that was from the opening of my. Isn't that big? That is amazing. And then I did these much more recently as freestanding pieces where I just wrapped them around a piece of firewood. And there you can see a little better view of that strapping system that holds them together. And these ones just got moved out of the lobby of MoCA, and these were done with my wife Bird Ross as a collaboration. They're, we call it the Stoop Project, and it's really based on it's a little bit our own experience. Our house is pushed up against the sidewalk. We have no front yard, but we sit on our front steps, and that's kind of how we stay in touch with the neighborhood. And so it's sort of that appreciation of stoop culture and the community aspect of sitting on the front steps is what we were playing with. So they're really meant to be front steps with the house removed. And the aesthetic just comes from, it's really sort of carpenter ornamentation, where it's very simple sort of exercises, drilling holes, and most of the power and the effectiveness, I think, comes from repetition. And we did a lot of research, took a lot of pictures, and then really sort of invented our own systems. If you stripped away this exterior decorative skin, underneath it's built like carpentry set of front steps would be built. And then the back, so that's the back side. And then another recent project, this was installed in September. This is at the Newton Central Downtown Library. If you go down into the kids section, you got to go all the way down, and then you got to actually look to the left. You'll see these 3 pods. They are willow and steel over a steel frame. They were built with a very skilled willow builder named David Chapman, who lives in Horror. And I'm pretty much as a beginner at the beginning of the project, and by now I'm sort of a beginner intermediate in terms of working with the willow and getting it to do what I want. But it's a really interesting project. It was a commission from the library, and these are obviously things that you can climb inside of with a book. And so we had pretty simple steel frames welded up, and then we got smart and subcontracted the upholstery. But the most of it is willow saplings, very small willow saplings, and they are 100% gathered just out by the side of the highway. Very often from under power lines where they tend to cut pretty regularly, but also swampy areas along streams. And so the materials here are 100% free, and really, really interesting, very different sort of way of working. You can see we played a lot with the sort of the patterning, the composition, the way the components were applied. There are an unimaginable number of nails in each one of these pieces. That's the primary building activity, is hammering nails. Here you can see it being used the way it's supposed to be used. Another project, another collaboration, a public collaboration. This is done with my wife, Bird Ross again. This is for the reception desk of the Children's Museum on the Capitol Square. So you can go in and see this. This is where parent and kid would go to buy their tickets. And the concept was to have sort of conventional stations where the parent and the museum employee can do the negotiation, exchanging the money, and giving information, while the children have something to do, and with in the rest of the piece. So there's all sorts of different things going on. And at the end, I'll show you a video of kids playing with it. But here you can see it's I think it's 40 feet of reception desk altogether, with different things going on in different places. We used a lot of books. So different elements, different components. This is a room that kids can look into and reach their hands into, because it's mirrored on all sides. And the last body of work I'm going to show you is work that was inspired by boat building. It's been a kind of an ongoing interest of mine over the years, and I think it's an interesting thing to add into the woodworking mix, and also what happens in the wood shop upstairs, because it's a very different approach to generating form. And the thing that's really interesting about boat building as a technology is this way that boats are often put together, a system of stations which identify what the form looks like in certain key places, but allow you to generate very complex compound forms that are bending in multiple dimensions, which is a hard thing to do in woodworking. So what you're looking at, the guy holding the boat in the upper left is a man named Platt Montfort, who lived in Maine. He's no longer alive, but he developed this line of ultralight boats that he calls geodesic aerolites. And he's using very traditional, the boat he's holding weighs, I think it's about 7 pounds, and holds one full-grown person. The technology is essentially sort of vintage airplane technology with a very simple wooden frame, and then a Dacron skin. So what you see that's white is a heat shrink Dacron. I'll show you a little more about that. But one thing to maybe notice in this picture is that it's translucent, so you can actually see the water showing through the skin of the boat in that example there. So myself and 2 graduate students, one summer, we built 3 boats in the woodshop upstairs. Matthias built his as a sailing rig, which is super cool, but it actually more than doubles the weight of the boat. And one of the things these books are about is super lightweight. So here's a little bit of the building process. You see a little bit about what I mean about how the form is generated. So here's the 3 hulls in the woodshop, and you can see just the simplest outlines over the stations. There's a lot of steaming of the wood that's involved in order to do the bending. So that's Matthias pulling wood out of the steamer. So the combination of heat and moisture is what makes the wood flexible. It's a really fun process that we do a lot of in the woodworking classes. And here you can see Matthias and Ben are taking a steam bent rib and they're popping it underneath the stringers, which are the lengthwise pieces, and they're filling in the blanks and building up the grid work. So here in the lower right, you see the grid work, fairly close to complete, actually. Now, if you were to take that, frame, and one person stood at the back, and And one person stood at